Hi, everyone. Welcome. So excited to have everyone here for this conversation that we're going to be having tonight around Inside the Manosphere, as well as the BBC documentary that covers the men of the Manosphere as well. And so I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Bruce King, and I am the executive director of an organization called Maine Boys to Men. I know that many of you are familiar with us, but I also know that we have a lot of other individuals joining us because we have such an amazing panel tonight that many of their fans and favorites have shown up as well. So without further ado, I'd love to just kind of frame up the conversation just a little bit and then have a chance to meet the panel. So yeah, once again, good evening. Tonight's conversation is inspired by two recent documentaries exploring the manosphere and the growing influence of the online masculinity content. Netflix Louis Theroux Inside the Manosphere and the BBC documentary Men of the Manosphere by James Blake. I hope people had the opportunity to watch them both, but if you didn't, I really hope that you go and check those out. While the Netflix film brought a lot of visibility and public attention to this topic, I think what the BBC film offered was more layered and a complicated look at the kinds of young men who are looking to the manosphere in order to find meaning. They seem to be looking for belonging, direction, and identity in all of those online spaces. And that complexity is hopefully something that we're going to be able to dive into because those dynamics of the interplay between the world of the creator and the receiver is really going to be central here. Uh, Researchers from Dublin City University's Anti-Bullying Center found that boys and young men encounter misogynist content within the first 23 minutes of scrolling on social media. And what often starts as searches around self-improvement, fitness, dating, confidence, or mental health can quickly become messaging about hierarchy, contempt, dominance, and who deserves respect. And what happens online doesn't stay online. We do see impact in schools, relationships, politics, body image, and in the ways that young people are understanding themselves and others. At the same time, if we're only going to talk about what's wrong with boys and men, we'll miss what they're actually looking for. So tonight isn't going to be a pile on. It's not about a moral panic. It's not really going to be so much about just the internet personalities. It's about belonging. It's about masculinity. It's about loneliness, shame, identity, power, aspiration, and the system shaping how young people understand themselves. We're lucky to have a panel to bring very different perspectives from youth work, public health, anti-racist education, masculinity work, online content creation, and fitness culture. And with that said, let's begin by getting to meet our panelists. And I'll give them a chance also to introduce a little bit of what they're working on and what brings them to the conversation. So if I can start by going to my good friend Shay Stewart Boulay.
I was hoping you didn't start with me, but hello. Really excited to be here, excited to have you all out in the audience and just to have this conversation. As Bruce said, my name is Shay Stewart Boulay. I wear a couple of different hats here on this panel. I'm the executive director of Community Change, Inc., which is a Boston-based 58-year-old anti-racism organization, which has a very specific purpose in that our focus is that we work with white people around race and understanding that the key to dismantling racism in the United States is really to actually bring white people into that work and into that fight. In the last 6 years, our work has expanded pretty deeply into Maine. So we work now both in the greater Boston area and in Maine. I'm also here wearing my other hat, which is Black Girl in Maine. I'm the creator of a blog that's been running now for almost 20 years. The blog has morphed into a number of social media platforms where I write in depth about race and politics and things like that. And I'm here tonight primarily because our work in recent years at CCI and my own personal interest, when I look at the anti-racism movement really in the last 5 to 10 years, you see a lot of white women, you see women of color, you see men of color, but you don't really see white men. In our work at CCI, we really don't see a lot of white men. They come through, they leave. And I think a lot of the reasons that you see like white men come and go are a lot of the same reasons of how you see young white boys entering into the manosphere. So I feel like there's a direct linkage between what we're seeing with the rise of the manosphere and also what we're seeing is the rise of white nationalism in this country. So that's sort of where I'm coming from tonight in the conversation. So thank you, Bruce.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shay. All right. If I can go to, I'm going to go to Danny Mejia, who's an old friend and former Maine Boys to Menor.
Yes, awesome. Thanks, Bruce, and thanks, Main Boys Time for having me back here. I was connected with the organization for a long time, interning, working, volunteering, a bunch of different capacities from 2016 until 2024, working as a program director for those last couple of years. I currently now also am wearing a couple different hats, but my main gig is working with Cumberland County Public Health, thinking about tobacco prevention, but thinking about prevention work at large. And I say that because when we think about what are the roots of some of these problems, when we look upstream, specifically for young boys and young men, it's all about bolstering those protective factors and reducing those risk factors. And so, whether it's violence prevention or tobacco prevention or any other types of prevention, I think when it comes to young boys, it comes back to some of the same solutions. And so, really excited to be here talking about the work that I've done in schools recently with boys around masculinity, how they've found belonging and centered themselves in community. I also facilitate a domestic violence intervention class once a week. So men who have domestic violence charges and are mandated by the state to go through a course. I think some of those conversations might be relevant here. So yeah, I'll stop there, but really excited to be a part of this and to be on this awesome panel.
Awesome. Thank you, Danny. And with that, I'd love to hop over to Fareed and let him introduce himself.
I'm Farid Mohammed Sito. I have him, he, him pronouns. I'm a 20-year-old student at the University of Vermont. I just finished my third year going for my bachelor's degree in business administration. For the past couple of years, I've been doing bodybuilding competitions. I'm coached by my father, who coaches some of the best in the world. So it's been really interesting to get a kind of unique and almost behind the scenes insight to that industry. I have my own platform on social media, just so that people can follow along with my journey, but also having that platform on Instagram. I've also been, I think more, I don't want to say for sure, but I think I might have a different insight onto what might be the appeal of the manosphere to young men, me being a young man myself. So hopefully in this conversation, I'm able to shed a little light on why the manosphere might be appealing to this younger generation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm super excited to have you here. And last but definitely not least, Jack, I'll let you introduce yourself and who you are and how you show up.
Yeah, good evening. My name's Jack. I was born and raised in the North Woods, inherited a lot of unhealthy patterns that I carried through my young adulthood, caused a lot of harm, and was kind of a unpleasant person. And 13 years ago, got clean and sober. I am a biology teacher by training and have also done a lot of work in the recovery community, ran a series of recovery houses for quite a while as a programs director. And that work carried me into, and my own work around facing my own harmful patterns carried me into men's work, which is what I do today. I help men face their patterns that they've inherited that they wish were different, help resolve inconsistencies in their ethics, and find different ways of being and different voices to follow. And it's a real honor and pleasure to be here today. I followed Shay for a long time. It's an honor to be on a panel with you, Shay. Farid, we've never met, but because Maine is tiny, your parents were at my wedding a few years ago, so it's really a pleasure to meet you as well. And I'm excited to be speaking with you, Danny and Bruce. Always such a pleasure. So thank you for having me here tonight.
Thank you all. Wow. Seriously, I just have to take all this in, because this is so for y'all who haven't had the privilege of attending these in the past, this is the third of our series of online panels, and I think we do feel very committed. Like, this is a really amazing way that we can talk about masculinity and men's issues, in a way that becomes available. And yes, there will be a recording, so it's a way that we can bring the public into the conversation and hopefully foster conversation beyond this. Because yeah, that's what we do at Maine Boys to Men. We're here to empower boys and men to embrace and reimagine their own masculinity and to build safer and stronger communities. And I will also just note that, this is the little plug at the beginning. We are a nonprofit organization, so we will put a link in the chat if you are so able to support our work financially. Greatly appreciate that. Or join our mailing list at least, and we can keep you up to date on these events, other events, and other things that are coming to our attention that we feel are central to the conversation. And also to the other extent, in terms of engaging the public here. We know that this is not, we just didn't quite have the format to be able to have like the audience all in the room at the same time. So this is going to be seminar style, but we really do want conversation and questions coming in. So there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This is a little bit longer. We've traditionally done these in 90-minute chunks. This one we actually put in 2 hours because we knew we had cream of the crop in terms of individuals who could really speak to these issues. And we also wanted to make sure, because last time we haven't necessarily had the opportunity to bring in voices, as much Q&A as we had hoped to. So with that out of the way, I would love to dive into the first kind of segment of our conversation here, which we'll call Appeal and Algorithms. So I want to start talking a little bit less about harm and more about the appeal. Clearly, the spaces are offering something in the manosphere. And if we don't understand what that something is, we're going to keep misunderstanding why so many boys and young men are drawn towards this content. So, Shay, if I could start with you, and I mean, answer this how you want, but when do you feel like the manosphere had come into relevance, not just, and become more culturally significant, not just from the fringe, but also something that you have to, reckon with? And was this inevitable? And I even have a part of that conversation, which is how do the algorithms plug into this? So many different parts. You can answer that however you want. But I'd love to start with you with that question, if that's okay.
No, that's fine. That's a really big question. I would say, as someone who has been on the internet really since the late 1900s, gosh, that sounds so old, but late 1990s, when you had the original discussion boards. And it was really about building community. For anybody old enough, you probably, we used to have boards. We didn't have Facebook and all of the other stuff. And then that sort of morphed into the social media that we now have. But I would say that when I think about the manosphere, it really kind of came to my attention, I think, in a huge way during the 2024 election season, when you started really seeing young men speaking out often on behalf of a certain candidate. But it was definitely there before. And I think that probably it really started to become a buzz thingy around when the pandemic, honestly. I mean, 2020 is when TikTok sort of exploded and became this thing when we were all locked in our homes. TikTok originally started existing around 2016, to my understanding, but most of us didn't really become aware of it until we were all in our homes and, on these devices. And so, TikTok really created this framework where people could just sort of blow up. I think about the first person that I'm aware of that really blew up from TikTok was indigenous gentleman, I think in Oklahoma, somewhere like that. He was a guy on the longboard with the juice. For anybody who, he was really one of the first breakout big TikTok people. And then from there, people started realizing wait, you could actually get deals. This isn't just make, some fun stuff just for your friends, like Instagram back in the day. It really became a thing. So I think, it was already sort of moving towards that. But certain, campaigns during 2024 really started using influencers. And so at that point, I think you saw younger guys really starting to realize, wait, I too could have this platform, make these videos, and suddenly become really, really well known. I mean, I'll be honest. If you are discovered that way, it can lead to some pretty lucrative deals. I mean, you can go from practically no money to 6 or 7 figures worth of money. So yeah, I think that's, to answer that first part of the question, that's when I became aware of the manosphere, really starting to pay attention to folks having opinions about things that historically we would have looked towards maybe scholars online. I mean, I was a part of the old school OG Black Twitter. And so in those days, you had folks who were professors or activists like me. And with the manosphere, that sort of changed everything. I mean, you would have people talking about a candidate, and yet they had really no political analysis, no class analysis, none of that. But, if you make your videos well enough, you develop a following. So does that answer at least part of that question? Because that was a huge question.
No, I think absolutely. And actually, that might be a good way to kind of pivot to Jack, because Jack, I know that Shay mentioned TikTok, and you have, I will say it in this room, you have an enormous presence in TikTok, and even me and you have spoken one-on-one about, like, I'm like, wow, like, because it is not a platform that I've dove into that deeply, except when I've worked with, I think it was about 8 years ago when I was working at Tree Street Youth, and a lot of the teens were starting to shift to that model rather than the Instagrams or whatnot. So can you talk a little bit, maybe it might be a chance to talk about kind of how you entered into TikTok and when you actually saw engagement there, what that looks like?
Yeah. So, uh, picking up where Shay left, that is, yes, the pandemic was a huge shift in the entire culture. That's spot on, and that's exactly what led to me being on TikTok to begin with. I've been doing men's work in private groups and in small sessions for a decade at that point, helping to look at my own patterns and helping other guys heal. And during the pandemic, everything shut down. All the recovery work shut down, all the in-person meeting groups shut down, and there was not this Zoom presence and the normalization of remote work yet. So I was sad, and I missed doing men's work. And I was talking about this with my wife, and they said, no, you could try doing some of that online. I was very skeptical of online stuff in general. I have an addictive personality, and the internet can be very addictive for me, and it's kind of a dangerous place. It can be very dehumanizing. It's hard to have good content online that doesn't immediately get pigeonholed or co-opted into something that is not at all what you were trying to do or say. But I tried it. I started responding to some questions that people were asking, and my content started picking up in a way that was completely unexpected. You might know me there as Watchful Coyote. Speaking of the old school internet, that is a handle I chose when I was like 16, and now it's just sort of haunts me and has become a brand, so I can't get rid of it. But I really feel like Bell Hooks has this famous quote where she said, everybody wants men to talk more about their emotions right up until men start talking more about their emotions. And that just hits the nail squarely on the head. And I think it has to be one of the entry points of awareness for this whole conversation. She picked that up and explored it in her book, Will to Change, through the lens of how when her male partner started talking more about his emotions, it threatened her concept of his masculinity because of the framework of masculinity that she was taught and had inherited. So she wanted him to talk about his emotions, but as soon as he did, he no longer felt like a man to her, or she didn't feel safe with his masculinity or their relationship. I would carry that a degree further and talk about how, because of men's programming, and if anyone's seen the film The Mask You Live In, phenomenal work, it talks about how young men are separated from our emotional vocabularies, and how a 10-year-old boy is able to tell his friends that he loves them, and a 15-year-old boy absolutely can't say that. That severance from emotional connectivity and emotional communication means that when men do start trying to talk about our emotions, we're guaranteed to do it in ways that are not the best, often harmful, often kind of challenging and problematic, because we don't have the skills, and our programming and our wounds are guaranteed to express. When we learn therapy language, we're going to start weaponizing that therapy language because of our wounds and our privilege. These things all intersect in these ways that show up to create an environment where there are virtually no spaces where men's emotions are really welcome. Not welcome with other men, not welcome with women in our life. And so where have young men had to turn for validation and those kinds of experiences? In a way, they've been largely abandoned. And that left a gigantic vacuum that the Manosphere was happy to scoop up an entire generation and validate their emotions and start saying, yeah, you are being oppressed. Yeah, you do have feelings. Your feelings are valid. And they were kind of the only people saying that for a long time. While the rest of us were saying, well, you have all this privilege and you need to check your privilege and you need to be aware of how you show up in spaces. If that is the entirety of a message, it does not leave a lot of breathing room. And that compared to a message like, hey, this is how you can be a healthier community member. This is what a path into deeper community and deeper health and deeper connection looks like. And that has not been present, which has left this opening that the Manosphere has filled.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you for that. I think there are certain things in there that you said that I could literally feel physically,
Mm.
especially the parts around like the desire to connect and also the desire to shut down. And yeah, and thank you just for invoking all of that in. Um,
Bruce, can I just piggyback on Jack for a
Please, and
second?
I was gonna go to you, but I won't even frame it. And I do have some questions specifically
This
for
is
you.
my way of avoiding a specific question and just
Okay,
talking
let's
about
go.
whatever I
We'll run with
want.
that. I like it better.
Jack, I mean, I think what you said resonated with me so deeply, and I see it in so many of the boys I work with, but also in some of the men. I mentioned that I help facilitate a domestic violence intervention class. So men who have committed domestic violence and are required to do a course, a 48-week long course. Which is an incredible amount of time to do introspection and self-reflection, especially for those that maybe haven't done a lot of it before. And me and my co-facilitator recently wanted to just check in with the men, some of which who had been there 30, 40 weeks into their 48 weeks of like, what other skills are you hoping to gain from this? Because we can do what we have, we can do our curriculum all day long, but like, let's hear from you all and let's co-create something here. And the number of men who spoke to how they want to have a better understanding of their own feelings and a better understanding of how to express those feelings to other people in which they will then be like taken seriously and understood. It's a deep desire and it's a need for so many men right now. So I think what you said really hits the nail on the head, and it's what I'm seeing on the ground right now as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that, Danny. Yeah, definitely touched on the directions I was going to go in without the direction. So I appreciate that. Fareed, I know that you'd mentioned a little bit like you've kind of you've landed on Instagram, and me and you have had just short conversations about kind of, the way that it's kind of been it's come from following your journey into fitness. Um, can you talk about maybe what it is that has attracted you to those forums early on? And then also, can you respond a little bit to maybe what your peers seem to be looking for when they're finding themselves approaching these platforms?
Yeah. So me personally, I'm on social media to share my progress and my journey, with bodybuilding. But there's a lot of people that don't really have a like goal in mind, but they just want to be seen by the masses. So they put themselves out there and they're going to highlight like their best attribute, whether that's that they can make a lot of money or they have a crazy physique or there's a ton of other things. And I think that in the past couple of years, social media has become less of a supplement to reality for young people, and it's become more of like an alternative. Some people spend so much time on social media nowadays, and it's when you spend so much time on social media, I think you were talking about the algorithms before. The algorithm can pick up on like just like a hint of an interest that you have. So even me, like I've had an interest, I've taken like small interest in, some I think a lot of people in the manosphere look at like a money making uh method. So if you there's been times that I take a look at a small interest in this, and then the next second everything like almost everything I see is about that. So it really feels like it's shoved in your face. And when that like virtual reality is like pushing you towards one direction and you see all this success of other people, that oftentimes in the manosphere are saying that, if you're not doing what this is, then that's your own fault and you're just not trying hard enough. So when you get that messaging, it really puts it really puts a lot of pressure on people, because if they're always going back to social media, so every time they open up their phone, they're getting this messaging, and it's just even for me, like it sometimes it's been hard to like just take a step back and think like, even if I did pursue something online, is it fulfilling to me? And that's been like a really well something that I tell myself to like recenter myself, and kind of like tell myself not to care about this other stuff. I'm focusing on what I'm doing, but it's just the everyone's impressionable, and more social media has just capitalized on that impressionability, and it's just it's hard to come to terms that there's reality, and then there's people that are stuck in a virtual reality because other people found success and are telling them that if you aren't finding success, then you're going to get left behind. That I think that's a lot of messaging online. If you're not acting now, then you're going to get left behind.
Yeah. Well, thank
Me
you.
for my like peers, like my friends in person, I can't really speak a lot on like what they experience, because it's social media, it's different for everyone. But to an extent, all the guys like my age in college will get some sort of the same messaging come across their feed, whether it's someone telling them that they need to do better, whether it's whether it's the algorithm pushing like somewhere that they want to be, but they just see it like over and over, so it almost feels like that goal is further and further away, because
Mm,
so many it creates a feeling of everyone's doing it, so why not me, even though everyone's not doing it.
yeah.
So when it looks like everyone's doing it, you kind of like think about yourself in a different way, and if I'm not doing it, then what am I doing?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. I think I mean, that really moves the conversation into a place where I'd like to um take it, which is what is it that we're finding the algorithm actually rewarding, so to speak. So Shay, I guess I'd like to go to you because I think you have a history of seeing it evolve, and I've also seen online some of your writings around the way that specifically AI, but not just AI, tends to kind of drive traffic in certain directions. So can you comment on that a bit?
Yeah, I think I'm going to pick up a little bit of what Fareed said because I actually just jotted it down because it really is profound. You said that social media has become an alternative to reality, and I actually would agree with that. Again, going back into sort of like the early days of social media used to be literally treated like that's not really real. In fact, if you used to say 15, 20 years ago, you had some friends online, people offline would look at you sort of like, you have some imaginary friends. Okay. I mean, that used to be really, I would have relationships with people, but I'd have to be really cautious of how I phrased it. But the world has changed so much as we see traditional media being just collapsed into social media. I mean, so much of our world now literally exists online. To the point that those who do attempt to get off of social media, regardless of gender, find it very hard because all the traditional ways of accessing information or even your entertainment don't really exist. So it's true. I would say that social media has become an alternative to reality. And you see that in all sorts of conversations. I think particularly around the manosphere, and I think about how that plays out in relationships with younger people and things like that. Sort of I know in certain segments of where I am sometimes online you hear about these $500 dates. Well, in reality nobody has $500 dates, but increasingly that's what people think is real. So yeah, I mean the algorithms themselves have changed. back when I started blogging, it was a very simple, you blogged on your little blog, maybe you shared your piece on Facebook, whatever, and people naturally just received it. Like it was in chronological order. For those of us who've been online for years, you might remember things used to be chronological. Now the algorithm really does drive what you see. What Fareed said is very real around, you mentioned something and suddenly your feed is filled with things. During the 2024 election cycle, I was very curious to find out, because people would say, well, are people not all getting the same news? And so I did an experiment on TikTok where I purposely stopped watching things that were news oriented towards my work and started following comedians and self-help people. And eventually my whole feed changed. Get very little in terms of like political stuff. And that was really an awakening moment for me about how powerful algorithms are, and how if you are not curious or you don't know to go look for stuff, you are only getting this one vision of reality. And that one vision of reality shapes increasingly your entire version of reality. I mean, we see that with like the news in terms of, I'm sure we've all had conversations where we'll say, are you not aware of this? And people are like, what are you talking about? I don't see that. And people don't understand that unless you really understand these algorithms, how AI and all of this works together, they're actually not lying to you. They really don't see that. And so you think about it in the context of this conversation, Manosphere, an algorithm's a pretty powerful thing. If you log on and all you're seeing are young, successful guys with, fancy cars and all this stuff, then you think that is reality unless you have community outside of that space. And that's where it gets tricky, because increasingly I'm thinking back to sort of the beginning of the conversation. I think Jack really alluded to it in his conversation about there's no spaces for men's emotions. And that's where it gets really like kind of sticky there, that this becomes your space. The algorithm is driving you to go find dudes who are having conversations that maybe you don't get to have offline with your offline community. And suddenly that becomes your whole world, unless there's somebody to tell you that's not all of reality. So yeah, it's to me, having been online for so many years, using it to make part of my living, using it professionally, it's actually terrifying how much of our shared reality is being shaped by this technology.
Wow. I think kind of the way that you piece that together, Shay, brought me to a recognition that we're dealing with two components of this, which is, as Jack said, there aren't necessarily public spaces usually where men are talking about their emotions, and then we have this anonymous space that kind of feels like it could be a remedy. It's like, oh, okay, like if men aren't able to just show up and be themselves, like, well, maybe this is a place where they'll actually show their softer, their softer components. And actually it almost feels like with this conversation, it almost did the opposite. So I mean, that's just something that's kind of bouncing around in terms of that reality. But Jack, I want to give you a chance to kind of answer this conversation also as a creator. So if you want to riff off of that, or also additionally, if you've noticed patterns in what you're rewarded for as a content creator, through the algorithms and through viewership.
Yeah. Every year I feel more and more that a lot of the work of healing masculinity, or in being a healthy man today, starts with a deep unpacking and questioning of everything that we are taught and inherit as beliefs about what being a man is. Simple stuff from the beginning. Like I learned as a child that men don't cry. Never saw a single man in my community cry. My father cried once my entire childhood. That's a belief I inherited and had to unpack. In a directly analogous way, today, we need to question and unpack what the definitions of success that we orient to are. What is success? There's this presumption that it always means the same thing. Financial success, having a car, having a mansion. That definition, number one, is almost always a lie, as we saw in the Manosphere documentary. Most of the guys who are up there flashing that kind of lifestyle are renting those cars and houses and faking the entire thing. So on especially online, you cannot believe those kinds of things. But much more importantly, the definitions of success that I inherited as a boy and a young man, what I was taught, led me to cause egregious harm. to myself and to my partners and to my community. The definitions of success that I inherited involved having a lot of partners, being sexually attractive, being sexually active, uh, being popular in certain ways that lead to patterns of behavior that are deeply antisocial. All of these definitions of success that I inherited directly led me to cause a lot of harm that I've now spent decades of my life working to understand better and shift and heal from. So I would advise families and young men to be deeply careful about who you allow to define success for you, because there are alternative definitions of success, like how safe do the people around you feel in your presence? That is a meaningful definition of success that will set you up well in your life. And it's not one that we can learn really from the manosphere, right? Not a lot of money to be made in that kind of definition of success. Back to Farid's point about getting left behind, there's also an element of truth underneath that. And so much of this, so much of the appeal of the manosphere is that it speaks to these instincts that young men have that are correct, but it appropriates those instincts and points them into a conclusion that is not correct at all. So the idea that if you don't set yourself up well from your youth, you might get left behind, there's some truth in that. But the success that you should be setting yourself up for is community, is relational skills, is being a healthy member of your society and community and being able to support others and learn and grow. Do that early on, and you will have a spectacular life. Orient to financial gain and having a fast car, and you'll be a miserable tiny person the rest of your life. I feel like in a roundabout way, this directly responds to what the algorithm prioritizes, right? The algorithm prioritizes what makes money. And today, through AI, we're seeing a terrifying trend, which is that now you don't even know if an influencer exists at all. Up until a year ago, you knew that whoever you were looking at was actually a person. Now you don't know. It could be completely fictional, and it could be coded by whoever owns the algorithm to get you to believe whatever they want you to believe. And one of the things that I think has appeal from the manosphere is this concept that it preaches to young men that there is a system set up to make you fail. And young men can feel that that is true. And it is true, just not in the way that the manosphere says. It's not that there's big feminism oppressing young men. It's that there is a structure of capitalist imperial patriarchy that is suppressing all of us and making everyone's lives worse, and young men feel that. So when someone says you're being oppressed, they're like, yeah, I do feel like I'm being oppressed. I feel like I don't have the opportunities that I was said I should have. I feel like I've talked for a minute, so I'm going to wrap it up there, but you get the idea of what I'm pointing to.
No, I think there's a lot there, and actually that helps kind of shift us to the next segment, which I wanted to cover. I wanted to shift us from just platforms and algorithms to identity and value, and I think we've actually been touching on a lot of those things already.
Yeah.
But underneath a lot of this content are those messages that we're talking about, which is this is what makes somebody worthy, respected, desirable. I think desirable is another component here. We talked about the bodybuilding, but you also mentioned the dating things and the other sorts of rewards that can come if you do self improvement. Because I think if I personally were to name something that is the draw of the manosphere, self-improvement seems to be at its core. Whether it's about physical, whether it's about ability to date, whether it's about ability to make money, those sorts of self-enrichment things seem to be the carrot at the end of the stick. And so I'd love to kind of dive into that. And actually, I'd like to start with Danny here. So in the Netflix documentary, there's an exchange that talks about the claim that men one individual in that says men are born without value and must earn it, whereas women, based on being beautiful or being able to reproduce, or basically being able to create life, their value is there. Whereas men, there seems to be there's no inherent value in accordance with kind of their perceptions. um I mean, I think I think we can say this doesn't really reflect real cultural expectations. Um, but can you speak to maybe where those realities are, or where the rubber's hitting the road, especially with the young people that you're working with around those realities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can try. And I'll start with an anecdote where I was helping co-facilitate and lead a community building circle at a local high school, unrelated to masculinity. And yet everything is, right? Especially for young men. And a young man came in, and before the circle even began, he sat down with me and he said, "Hey man, I was watching this YouTube clip. I don't know whether it was a video or a short or what exactly the content was, but he said, and it was so similar to one of the clips from the Louis Theroux documentary that I almost wonder if it was the same format in terms of one of those radio host guys. But he said that it was a clip of a woman saying, like, here are all the things that I need a man to bring in a relationship. I need a man to bring 100K plus baseline. I need him to be 6 feet tall. I need him to be at least a college athlete, but hopefully pro, XYZ, and the list went on. And then in the clip, she is asked, the woman is asked, what are you going to bring to the relationship? And she said, I'm going to bring myself. Like, myself is enough here. And the man that I was sitting with in that local high school was saying that rubbed him so wrong, right? That he feels so like he can't live up to these expectations that I'm not sure are necessarily actually being placed on him, but that he thinks are being placed on him through these videos that, as Jack and Shay and others have so eloquently put out, are just to make money, right? Are viral because they are so reactionary often, right? Um, and I think I could feel the hurt and the worry that he had in that moment of feeling like he might be left behind because he knows he isn't going to grow maybe above 6 feet. He knows that the career he wants to go in is not necessarily going to make the type of money. He'd love to be a pro athlete, but he's not sure that's going to be a reality for him, right? And so I think I think these feelings can be real. And for young people, I think there's still maybe an unsureness whether that is reality or not. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's something that I'm noticing even in spaces, again, that aren't necessarily dedicated to conversations around masculinity. It's what men are walking into those spaces with. It's what they're carrying all the time.
I think that really does start to answer that question. That anecdote is amazing, and it's also something that even myself as an adult can relate to. And I've heard that, like, I want a man who's 6 feet or whatever, and all of a sudden I'm like finding myself like hanging and trying. I'm like, oh, I can get at least another, like, 2 inches here if I just hang from the ceiling long enough. But no, I think those are real realities, and especially with young people who are trying to navigate like a new kind of way of being. I think that's hugely challenging to figure out what those realities are. So yeah, I think that illustrates that perfectly. Um, Actually, Fareed, I think this is a place where I'd love to bring you in. So I want to celebrate you in terms of like your achievements. And so you named that you're a bodybuilder, and I don't know how many people heard it or whether you mentioned it when you introduced yourself, but you're an all natural bodybuilder, right? So like that's a real big component of kind of your journey and why you do what you do and how you do what you do. And at the same time, I want to name the big Manosphere influencer of the moment, at least, seems to be this guy Clavicular or Clavicular or however it's pronounced.
Yeah.
And he's all about looks maxing, which sounds like it's just trying to become the most attractive that you can possibly be. Um, but then there are all these pressures, and we're also talking about the fact that a lot of these people are selling things, and I think often they're supplements. But so there's so much intersection with all of a sudden it feels like performance enhancing drugs specifically are becoming a bigger part of the equation, and these looks
Yeah.
maxing guys are actually naming that. Can you talk a little bit about the maybe concerns that you have around the things that you're seeing in the bodybuilding world, especially with the younger generation? How is this normalizing performance enhancing drugs in a different way? I feel like young people are talking about them in ways that I have not heard people of like my generation talking about performance enhancing drugs. Like, so yeah, can you tell me what that reality looks like for you and those
Yeah.
around you?
Yeah. I did want to preface that with while the things that are told to these young people that you should go and pursue, in like they might they're like there are things that would normally like improve your life. Like, if you want to improve your looks, if you want to improve your looks, go improve your looks. If you want to make more money, go make more money. If you want to go to the gym, go to the gym and so forth. But I feel like it's been pushed more as like a framework to follow than follow your heart, instead of encouragement, it's more it's more commanding to, you know, go, you want this, or you have to have this, use this tool. And that kind of segues into what you're saying about performance enhancing drugs and other things, is that pe younger people are looking for uh like the quickest way to get there. Not many people want to wait anymore. That's that's why things like, I think, like in the financial sphere of it, sales is like huge. You have to be able to talk to people and get what you want out of them. You got to convince them that they need this thing and you have what they provide. And then on like I guess like the fitness, bodybuilding side, physique side of things, it's become so popular that like to take these sort of drugs, even whereas like a few years ago, if you were and someone knew you were, you'd be called out for it. But nowadays people, if it doesn't have like severe side effects, people have become like so normalized with it. I the guy is not really like a close friend of mine, more of an acquaintance. But he's in, I think, a year younger than me at my college. I got told by someone else he's on this thing called Retta, which I believe is a peptide that uh so I don't know much about this stuff when anyone asks me about it. But from my understanding, it affects your hormones to like decrease hunger mainly. And I'm not shaming this guy for his looks at all, but if you look at him, you would have to ask, like, he's not fat at all. He's not fat at all. You would think that his goal would to be to like build muscle or put on weight maybe. And I was just so surprised to hear, because I'm just thinking like, what why are you taking a shortcut that you don't even need at all? And that's kind of just what they've become, shortcuts, because everyone sees like all the best physiques on Instagram or TikTok just showing up. Half of these guys do it the long way. Half of these guys take performance enhancing drugs and then show themselves on the internet. But to like a young person, doesn't really, they don't know, and doesn't even matter if they know if they did it without drugs or not. But they're going to see that over and over and over, and from what they think is like everyone, because when they open up their phone, it's over and over and over, that they're going to look for the shortest route and try and justify the reason for taking that. I give advice to my advice to like a lot of people is that I think people underestimate what they can do with their own bodies nowadays. They just don't have the patience for it. A year goes by, and they might not see the progress they want to see, and they decide to take a quicker alternative route. And a year in a sense is a long time, but also it isn't. Some people are different. Sometimes it takes them a lot longer to get there. Sometimes it takes people really quick to get there. But to just become a normalization of taking the shortcut, even if it might be endangering your health. And
Yeah.
it's definitely been leaking into the younger generation, especially because I don't know the routes people get these, but it's for some reason so accessible. And even there's this influencer named Sam Sulek who's very popular, and he gained his popularity from just being like he would just do like YouTube vlogs in the gym, like pretty much like completely unedited. Everyone knows he's been on performance enhancing drugs since whenever he gained popularity back in like 22 or 23. But that's not what was the appeal for people. It was that he was acting like a real human being. But even now, he's starting up his own peptide company, and he's putting out AI advertisements on Instagram for it. He has 7 million followers. Probably 6 million of those people are under the age of like 25. It's That's how normalized it's become. Even a guy like him can feel completely okay pushing pushing this advertisement for this type of stuff to what he knows is a young population. And it's very weird to see that everyone wants to rush into it so quickly, because then if you I'm sure, I'm willing to bet that most of you have watched The Incredibles. And there's a line from Syndrome where he says, if everyone's super, then no one will be. Everyone's rushing to that. So even if you want to look like that, if you're taking the shortcut just like everyone else, then you've kind of just ruined the like reward of taking the time to reach that goal. And I think if people keep on, even like financially, if people keep on trying to take the shortest route to it, it just doesn't become fulfilling at all. And then that can just leak into other portions of someone's life to where they want stuff as quickly as possible, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. But at the end of the day, how fulfilling was that journey for them?
Sure. So I'm hearing kind of a tension here between there's a personal sense of value that I'm hearing versus the external sense of value.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like, in I guess we could call it the attention economy, which seems to be common nomenclature these days. It really is about centering the eyes on yourself. And I guess I'll go to Shay first. Like, how do we do this? How as a creator, how does one navigate doing this ethically around engagement? I know there's things like rage baiting, there are things that people are being purposefully antagonistic, but I'm just curious, even in your career, like, how do you keep your work, how does one think about keeping their work relevant while trying to keep it pro-social?
Wow. I think that this is where being sort of a quote unquote older creator probably brings a lot of value. Just thinking about what Fareed said, and I made some notes here about how everything is sort of sped up. But I see that as a part of not just the manosphere and younger people. It's sort of where our society is going. That as technology has become more and more pronounced in our lives. I mean, one of the reasons there's this big push for AI is ultimately like where will people work if AI replaces us? Like nobody's willing to answer that question yet. It's like everything has to be efficient and bigger and better and bigger and better. And yet I'm going to throw this framework out there that all of that is part of the culture of white supremacy, in terms of when you look at the values that are inherent in the culture of whiteness, which dominates the American culture, it's always more, it's always better, but it's never how to be more human. Like being human is not the thing that we do in this country, and by extension a good part of the world in which we've influenced. I think, for myself personally, it comes down to, I've been creating stuff since I was 30. I became a blogger when my kid was 3. She's turning 21 in 2 months. So I've been at this a long time. I've seen people burn out. I was part of the first wave of quote unquote mom bloggers, which is funny. Now they're called influencers. Mom bloggers are really like the prehistoric. We are like the ancestors of today's influencers. And yet even then, 15, 20 years ago, you had women who were starting to get deals and all. We used to have the blog conferences, and there were people who shot up to like 7 figures. Most of those people crashed out, seriously crashed out. I'm still in touch with some of those women now, all in their 50s. The kids are grown. Most people have regretted turning their children into objects. Most people regretted turning their lives into like a thing to sell. And I wish sometimes when I look at the younger creators that I could tell people, one day you will regret, I swear to you, selling your whole self. You are not a product. Because when you think about it, yes, you make money, but this company makes way more money off this free content that you create, which ultimately we all started this as a form of connection. I mean, the original blogs, the original thing, it was about connection. I started blogging because I had a 3-year-old kid. My mom had just died. I lived in Maine. I wanted to have a conversation. Black Girl in Maine was literally about, I'm Black. I moved to Maine. How do I find more Black people? It was never meant to be a thing. And maybe my success is that part of me has never wanted it to be a thing. For the first few years, I wrote about my kids, but when I started, they were 3 and 16. When my son went to college, it was very clear his stories weren't mine to tell. And honestly, once you've had one kid, my God, we don't all need kid stories. Trust me on this. I think it takes intentionality to keep yourself grounded as a person, because the internet, it blows you up. I mean, you could have like 8 million people following you on the internet. You could walk outside. Nobody knows who the heck you are, but the internet has you pumped up. And now increasingly, as it's become integrated into all areas of our lives, you're out here feeling like you've done a thing, when I'm not going to poo-poo what people are doing online. But, again, this is my old head coming in here. Like, what did you do? You made a video and you said a thing. Like, you need perspective. And that's where I think people need the community offline to keep that balance, to keep you focused. Fareed, what you said about, these younger folks wanting to do using the drugs and all of that. And part of me as a mom and grandma, my heart was just like, I hate that, because my oldest grandson's 9 and he's been into watching the streamers. And Bruce, I know I shared this with you. That was a big part of why I agreed to do this, because my son called me after he watched this documentary and was like, oh my gosh, this is really scary stuff. And just thinking about how this impacts you, especially if you're super young and you're thinking about, I got to get the money now, I got to get the this, I got to get the that. And I'm always like, I see younger people online talking about, well, before I get old, what's old? Like 30. What the hell you think happens after 30? You're just going to drop, and we're laughing, but it scares me, because if technology has removed younger people from families, and to be fair, families are removed from families because of technology. We used to eat dinner together. We used to have shared experiences. Some of us, if you're old enough, you used to listen to your parents' music. Now kids, younger people don't know about Michael Jackson other than 4 songs, because everybody started listening to the music in their ears. So we're not having the shared experiences that keep us human. So I would tell anybody, I think when I think about young men and the influences, I'm going to be honest, I think it's always been a hard place, particularly for young men. I think there's never been enough space for men in general to be able to talk about their feelings. I've had a couple of husbands, so I've learned a couple of things. I have a son in his 30s. I might know a thing or two about the struggles of men, but I think the Manosphere could be a place that could have a lot of value. But when you bring in sort of the capitalism and sort of all the isms, it doesn't become that healthy space. But these are the conversations. And again, just hearing, you, Fareed, makes me think about, how do you retain your humanity in the midst of this? As honestly, that is for me, Bruce, very, for how I keep grounded is I have people that if I'm ever doing dumb stuff because a bunch of people follow me and I know some famous people, please pull my coattails. Don't have me out here thinking I'm more than what I really am. That's how I balance my humanity with what I put out there. And it's what I would tell any young person who's creating. You have to find that balance. Otherwise, I think we get into this to do good. We want to put something out there that's good. We want to start good conversations. And the only way we do that is by staying rooted and grounded in our values. And that's hard. It's increasingly harder and harder now when everything, including our government, is run on the internet with maybe real people or not. So hope that added to this conversation.
Yeah. Do you want, is it okay for us to shout out your son? I just feel I would love to.
Sure.
I would love to just bring more attention to his work. I was aware of him before I was aware of Shay's work. But I also don't know what he goes by now. He's been Milo, he's been Rap Ferreira, he's
And
been
still R.A.P. Ferreira, which I think I shared with you. Most people don't know that when he changed from Milo the rapper to R.A.P., those are actually his initials. His first two middle names and last name. I had no idea when I had a kid 34 years ago and we named him Rory Allen Phillip Ferreira that he'd become a rapper, and that would make it really convenient to be Rap Ferreira.
no, he's ridiculous. He's part of the Hellfire Club crew, or used to be, and yeah, I was a big fan. So just shout out to him, and hoping that he's continuing to, just live his life, because he's also an artist. So I imagine that the conversations around this kind of stuff around the dinner table are just insane. And
Oh, they really are. It's huge, especially again with the oldest boy being 9 now, and there's another. We've got the younger son, grandson. So yeah, this has become part of his world. And at 34, he's like, I built a career off the internet and became famous as a musician, and now it's all scary to me, which is interesting for me to hear him say as a 30-something-year-old.
yeah, oh, that's profound. Thank you so much. All right, before I go to Jack, I'm going to go to Fareed, because Fareed has something that he wants to pop in on, and then Jack, I would love to hear your reactions to this. So if you want to think about those, but
Sorry to delay you, Jack,
yeah,
but Shay had mentioned streaming, and it got me thinking. It feels like there's been the past couple years a boom of just general social media, but I think in the past like year and a half, there's been a massive boom in live streaming, and I think that takes what you see on social media, being like that virtual reality a step further, because what these streamers are doing, I mean, oftentimes they have people like taking clips of their live streams and putting it on social media. But what this content is, I believe, is doing is these live streamers are doing it live. This is like this is like typically like unedited, unfiltered, but it's happening in real time. So I think that takes the layer of this alternate reality a step further, because
mm,
people actually recognize like these people are like actually doing it. It's not just like a video that someone scripted, edited, put out on to like Instagram. This is what these people are doing for a living. So I think that just adds like a second layer onto the like detachment from reality that a lot of young people will see. And you mentioned Clavicular earlier. He's like up there in I think this boom of live streaming. And it's been real it I think live streaming has be made it really easy for people to act in a way that's detrimental, but since it's in reality, it's a lot more shocking to people to see. It's not just oftentimes not just a character that's being set up before the camera goes on. It feels more like real life to people.
yeah. No, I love that, and I think it brings us back to the documentary, which shout out to anybody who made it through the whole thing. It is very cringy to watch some of this stuff, and I've watched it 3 times now, and I still cringe. But I was watching it today, and actually, I thank you, Fareed, for pointing that out. Which is, the live streams actually find ways in which, yeah, it seems to collapse the worlds in a way, but it almost seems like the digital is winning there. It's like people are serving the digital reality more than they're serving their real reality, when they're doing these live streams. So that's the way it's landed for me. I'm also hearing huge themes around how, and Shay, thank you for naming, like, this stuff is about connection, and at its core, it seems like young men are looking for connection. I think the internet was about connection, and then commerce, and they're like, okay, how do we monetize this? And it feels like commerce is kind of pulling it almost makes it impossible for connection and commerce to coexist, and maybe they can coexist, but I definitely feel a tension there. So thank you for y'all, because I think you guys are naming some really important points here. Jack, I know that a lot of this is very much in your wheelhouse. I'd love to go to you.
Yeah. Uh, the AI piece is so much bigger than any of us are capable of understanding yet. We don't know what that tool is going to do. And what we're seeing already is quite horrifying. So I'm a biology teacher. That's my background, and I enjoy following the research. And the research is crystal clear that for every 5 minute interval that someone spends using AI, their cognitive capacity crashes demonstrably. It reduces human cognitive ability. And right now, I get prompts all the time on social media to use AI to make content, to use it to make avatars, to use it to make scripts for me, to give it me ideas for videos. As a creator on TikTok, despite the fact that I have never engaged with a single form of AI on there that voluntarily, it's shoved down my throat all the time. And it's this messaging that you can be famous. Just click this AI generate button and you can generate, it'll generate the prompt for you. You can feed that prompt into another AI. It'll generate a script for you. You can make your body look however you want. And a ton of creators now who are established creators are using AI to write scripts for them. What that means is that, again, whoever owns the algorithm is now speaking through your mouth as a creator. If you are allowing AI to write your scripts for you, you are becoming a mouthpiece for whoever the richest billionaire is that owns that algorithm. And that should horrify all of us. It relates back to these wounds and the ways that men are taught to cause harm. It relates back to the foundations of all of this. I know we'll get to accountability in a bit, but for now, I just want to say, especially to any younger folks listening, be very careful what you put your name on. Be very careful what you put your face on. You are all you ever get, and you can change who you are. But if you do things now, either in front of a camera with an AI script that you didn't write, or behind closed doors with a person that you think you're in a secret space with, all of those are part of who you are. And they will be part of who you are the rest of your life. So, your signature, your face, your name, your identity, that is the most important thing you hold. And treat it with exceptional care. Because if you choose to become a mouthpiece for these corporations, or you choose to replicate these AI models in this way, whether that's a college essay or an AI prompt on TikTok, that's not actually you. And you don't know who you're representing.
Yeah.
Um,
Jack, actually, you've kind of perfectly teed up the next segment. So if you don't mind, I'd love to tee it up, and I'd love to go to you directly. And just say, even based on that, on what you just stated there, you've worked with men who have caused harm. You've been explicit about harm that you've caused, and you've publicly, moved into a place where you've worked on taking ownership of that. Um, I think what you represent in terms of a lot of the stuff that you show online feels in some ways like it's a response to what I'm seeing happening in the manosphere, which is when somebody causes harm, rather than trying to figure out, first of all, rather than trying to apologize and figure out how to address their harms, they're running towards these groups of men who are validating whatever it is that has happened, sometimes creating heroes out of these men, sometimes creating very powerful politicians out of these men, who have legitimately, caused huge harm in their community. And that feels like it's a very attractive carrot on a stick for individuals who feel any sense of guilt. One thing we haven't really woven in here is the way that guilt and shame, I think we touched a little on shame, but really the way that can kind of weave in. I mean, I guess my question to you, Jack, is with the work that you've done, you know, how have how have you managed to keep the, we'll call them perpetrators, coming to a process of healing. And that isn't just limited to the online space. I'm talking in general. And then also, how do we address, how do we keep young people who feel guilty from like running towards those groups? I mean, I think there's components of call-in culture and things like that here. But this is a big question that I wanted to ask you for this.
Yeah, that's a huge question, Bruce.
I know. And it's a good way to move into this part of the conversation. So
in order for education to happen, a teacher has to have something that a student wants. Otherwise, it's just non-consensually locking a student in a room with a teacher and then making something happen against the student's will. This is especially true for adults. So you asked, how do I keep men coming back to me to be part of a process around facing their own patterns of harm? Men do that because they want something I have. And that thing that I have varies man to man. I think there's a level of some kind of integrity that they perceive in my transparency about how the fact that I harmed my partners. I had a pattern of sexual violence against women in my life. I was an addict. I was a piece of shit for a long time. And now, today, I am part of the healthiest community that I've ever known in my entire life. Not because I deny that or minimize that, but because I walked through that. I was present with that fire, and I sat with a lot of rage. And now I have an incredibly stable, loving marriage. Many of you know my incredible spouse. And men crave that. They crave it with their entire being. Every time this subject comes up anywhere, even with guys I've never met before, they're like, holy shit, you can talk about having caused harm and then have community on the other side of that? Where the hell is that world? How did you get there? Men reach out to me regularly being like, how did you go through that and find community and find any kind of integrity or stability in your life? Because they've never seen it before, which is understandable. Most of the patterns that we have as a society are built on punishment. They're punitive. So we ostracize, we punish. And then, of course, men are afraid of that happening to them, and that sucks all the air out of the room for those conversations to happen more. Shay just said this again so clearly. She said there's never been enough space for men's feelings. And part of those feelings are about the fact that all men inherit patterns of harm, perpetrate harm, mostly to women in our lives and to ourselves and other men. And then we're just supposed to go through our lives like machines, never discussing that, never facing that, never having any kind of process about that. And it cripples men. It makes us into emotionally stunted children. And anyone who grows up in an unsafe home is going to carry patterns of defensiveness. Anytime there's a sense of fault being put on someone who grew up in an unsafe home, it is guaranteed to evoke a sense of defensiveness, because that's a safety mechanism to keep a 5-year-old safe. And most men carry that exact thing. So when we experience any sense of fault, we either want to self-shame ourselves. Yeah, I'm such a terrible person. That's defensiveness. That's trying to minimize harm to us. Or we want to deflect it. I didn't do that. It wasn't that bad. That's defensiveness. Both of those responses are leaning away from the lesson, from the harm, from what actually happened. And to lean into that is to literally lean into fire, especially for those of us who grew up in unsafe homes. We're literally leaning into a flame and trusting someone on the other side to catch us. And mostly, it doesn't work. I see a lot of men walk away from those processes. I see a lot of communities cause a lot of harm. And communities contact me these days as well and say, how do you do this? How do you hold a man? How do you hold a man accountable? And I have to start by explaining accountability is a label that we put on people or don't. So if Bruce did something that harmed a partner, and I know about this from community because we're in the same community, and the community comes to me and says, Jack, Bruce caused harm in this way. Bruce comes to me and says, I caused harm in this way. And a year later, Bruce is saying, this is the harm I caused. This is what I did to reconcile that. This is where I'm at with it. And everyone's stories align. And Bruce is no longer causing harm, and I have the community connections to know and verify that. Then I'll say, yeah, Bruce is accountable. But there will always be people in the community who will say Bruce is never accountable. No matter what he does to heal, he's always going to be just an absolute scumbag who should be canceled and never let back in community. That doesn't mean Bruce is not accountable. It means that accountability is a subjective term that we ascribe to some people and not to other people based on our ethics and our experiences. So when you're talking about the appeal that the red pill community, the manosphere community has for these young men, especially men who know they've caused harm on some level or another, it's that it's instant accountability. In the manosphere, they're going to instantly say, oh, yeah, that wasn't your fault. You're an accountable man. You did exactly what a man is supposed to do when you harmed that woman. Whereas in other communities, if there is any pathway to accountability, which there's usually not really that's available, it's a lot more work. So it's exactly what Farid was saying. There's an orientation to instant gratification culture. If you caused harm and you want instant accountability to be welcomed in a community, jump to the manosphere, jump to the red pill. You'll be welcomed there as a hero, like you're saying. But again, this comes back to who we allow to define success. If the people you allow to define success are deeply wounded, exploitative, harmful, unhappy people, because when I watched that Manosphere documentary, I'm like, my God, these men are all miserable. They're cripplingly miserable and depressed people who are terrified that their little fragile thing they've built is going to be shattered because it's all spun lies. They're terrified and miserable. If those are the people you're orienting to and allowing to define success, then your sense of success and accountability is always going to be equally as fragile and broken. Mm. If you have a diverse, healthy community of people who you can actually trust and who are happy and grounded and have integrity, then accountability is going to be a lot more work for you to be accountable in the eyes of that community. And that is unappealing. We make it appealing by demonstrating the health, by me being able to stand up today and say, yeah, I caused harm. And now, because I'm transparent about that, I have the healthiest relationship I've ever been in. I'm part of the strongest community I've ever been in. I'm welcome, and not only welcome, I'm celebrated for having done that work. And it's mostly communities of color that do that. I am not convinced that white people are capable of practicing accountability without the support of communities of color today. White people are so hesitant to affirm growth for some reason. It feels like white people almost always have this sense that they need to find something to condemn in it. Like, yeah, you're doing good, but you still need to work on this. Whereas my experience of communities of color, my therapist is a woman of color, my wife is a woman of color, they just seem much more comfortable being like, nah, you've done the work you're supposed to do, you're doing great now, you're awesome, haters gonna hate, let them, you're doing you. And that kind of unqualified affirmation is so rare for men who have caused harm. And this is why I'm not sure that we're capable of doing accountability work without the support of communities of color today. So that was a long, rambly answer to some of your question.
There's a lot there. Thank you so much, Danny. I know that you're doing you're doing work with batterers, or as I guess that's not the language currently, but you're trying to do a lot of that work. Can you kind of, I guess, can you kind of speak to that and what that looks like in terms of do you see change, and where do you see those components of change being possible, or whatever anecdotes feel relevant for that?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, I feel like Jack, you said so much and you said it so well, that this might be repeating some of what you said, but I see this group of men, as I mentioned, who have committed domestic violence. And I think just to show up as a man in that space and say, I think you guys are more than your worst day, than your biggest mistake. I think we all have the capacity to grow and change. You can see the walls start to drop. And you can see that for a lot of these guys, they haven't been told that, right? And when Jack was talking about like these guys keep showing up because they want something. Well, in this case, these guys keep showing up because they're mandated. But that being said, a lot of them have said to me, I was not excited about this first class. Now I look forward to it every week. Now this is something that means something to me, because I can see the ways in which I'm growing and I'm changing. And I think part of what they're looking for Jack, it's maybe this appeal of a life, right? That a loving spouse can provide, or whatever else. I think for a lot of these guys, they're looking for peace. And it's something they haven't had, this sense of peace, this idea that they can go about the actions in their lives and not feel guilt or shame after what they've done because, maybe in that moment, it helps them accomplish whatever they're looking for. And maybe they can turn to whatever red pill influencer to say you did the right thing. But oftentimes, a lot of these guys are still left with some feeling of shame or questioning or guilt afterwards. And they're saying, was that right? Because my partner is scared around me now, right? And I know something, I learned something somewhere to say that that doesn't sit with me. So a sense of peace, I think. They see others in the group, and I think we so often learn through our stories and the shared experience and the humanity of others is in our stories. And for me, if I can offer the opportunity for some of these men to hear the stories of where things have worked, where they found that peace, where they found success, where they've grown and changed. And it's so funny, Jack, everything you mentioned right now in this group that I'm leading, we're talking about minimization, denial, and blame, right? And so where are the ways in which we can take accountability, even for the small things, right? Because when we practice the small things. Our brain is a muscle. We get stronger and we get better at it. So, where are the small things, the ways in which we can take accountability as men to say, yeah, I messed up a little bit here, and just to try on that language, see how it goes with our partner, see how we're met. Maybe if we keep practicing that, we're able to do it with some of those bigger things. Maybe we're able even to uncover some of those things from the past that Jack, I think, has been talking about so well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Shay, I'd love to, I, I without naming the specific political realities. I know that there, part of your internet presence has been talking about accountability, as well as talking about pathways to healing. Um, are there any ways that yeah, I guess without guiding you too much, are there things that this is bringing up around the current reality of the cultural zeitgeist?
Yeah, I actually jotted down when Jack said this because I thought it was really powerful and it really does lean into actually what I really do for a living.
Yeah.
Jack said white people are hesitant to affirm growth. And I do think about that a lot in the context, really just all over when I think about white American culture in particular doesn't affirm growth. It's sort of like if you start off here, you will always be there. I mean,
Mm,
when you really think about our whole system of punishment in this country, like, someone commits a crime, they serve their time, and now you're branded as a felon for the rest of your life, which therefore screws up, can really make it hard for you to move on. Um, and I think a lot about this in the context of the work that I do is in anti-racism spaces, at least the ones that I tend to be in, there's sort of an acknowledgement that if white people really want to work with me, work with our organization, you're going to realize at a certain point that you have done racist things. It is very rare that there is a white person, and I was married to a white guy who's never done a racist thing. In fact, my thing is the louder you scream about how you're not a racist and another white person is a racist is normally my internal red flag that you are not a safe person because you lack introspection. You lack the ability to step back and sort of look at yourself and go, you know what? Um, and I think a lot about, we're talking about the manosphere, we're talking about this moment. And, I'm glad that Bruce, when you opened up this conversation, you made it really clear, point in conversation isn't to say, oh my God, these men are all awful, because that's not the reality at all. They are living in a culture that has put some really unrealistic pressures and expectations on them. I mean, I came of age in the late 80s and 90s, and I would not wish to be a young person today. I cannot imagine the pressures that younger people face to have this perfect body, to have these things that are so not realistic that you don't realize aren't realistic until you live long enough to get there. And so I can see the space where a lot of mistakes are made. And I do worry in thinking about what happens when, say, one of these, youngsters who's involved in the manosphere or the streaming or the whatever decides they want to make a change. Will that always be held against them? Trying to think of a way to phrase this. Some time ago, I'm not going to get into that. I want to go down that road. I'll just say that I think that even in social justice spaces, people can do some really good work, but people will constantly bring up their past without ever acknowledging that people change and grow. I would imagine maybe this is harder even for white men to sit down and have a conversation to really allow themselves to affirm growth. But I think it really starts internally, being able to let go of your own shame and everything. And often, though, that's going to require, as Jack said, somebody who kind of maybe you got somebody telling you you can let go of this. We've all done or said things. Um, I think the way forward is that somehow I'd love to see these same communities to be able to create accountability, to create spaces where the conversations can be real. And I think that's going to take really talking about capitalism, talking about the role capitalism plays in all of this. I mean, everything in our country is underwritten by capitalism. I mean, when I think back to like, historic nature of what was done to Black and Indigenous people was really around building wealth in this country. It was capitalism. First forms of capitalism were literally my descendants. We talk about capitalism in this vague way without realizing how it impacts everything, but it also affects our ability to be real, to create the conditions where we can see growth. And I think specifically when I think about men and I think about white men, I don't envy white men. I can't imagine how awful it must be to have this psychic epigenetic burden that you must carry by people you maybe never in your life met, but because of your very being, you are just not trusted. Even if you go and you do the work and you really have made change and you're trying to be accountable, and yet people always see you in a certain light. Because I would say for myself as a Black woman, it's to say, well, all Black women are wonderful. And if you look on the internet, there are definitely people who seem to believe that. And I'm like, that's not true either. There's some really awful sisters that I've met out there. We shouldn't lift those people up either. And again, that's just that human piece of connection. But I think Jack's statement was really powerful about white people are hesitant to affirm growth. And I think that when we talk about moving beyond what we've seen in these documentaries, we've got to talk about a pathway that affirms growth. Otherwise, how do how do people grow from a moment that happened when they were like 18 to 24? When you're 18 to 24, the world seems enormous. When you're looking back at it like me now in my 50s, you're like, oh my God, it was such a blip in time, man. It was such a blip. Nobody cares. You're not going to care down the road. So that's my thought there.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah, wow. I feel like we just went far deeper than I expected to on this panel, just with that one question. And we have so much. We have some amazing questions from the audience that I'd love to delve into. But before that, Fareed, I just want to ask you with sincerity, and I know you're uncomfortable speaking for your peers to a certain extent, but to whatever extent you're comfortable, I mean, I'm curious with everything that is being put out on social media, to what extent are you and your peers able to filter out the realities that like that virtual reality that you talked about? Yeah, to what extent are young people buying into this? And what do the conversations look like?
That's a little kind of a hard one to answer because my peers nowadays are like me in college. So we kind of have like we have like a other tethers to reality, and it's entirely dependent on someone's situation. Like if they got someone might be coming out of high school and so have absolutely no clue what they want to do other than they have to go get a job and make money. Someone like that is probably going to be more vulnerable to falling victim to this sort of messaging.
Yeah.
Um, but for me personally, I think I touched on this earlier. You kind of have to take a step back and ask yourself, what is most important to me? Is making money right now really worth ditching or setting to the side the other passions that I may have? And even if you don't have passions, is focusing on your financial situation worth forsaking that exploration into who you are and what you want to do? So I think for everyone, what I'd recommend for younger audiences is to just take a step back and think about things and think about what you want. I have to take a step back oftentimes and tell myself to slow down because my mom tells me this a lot. Whenever I'm I'm feeling down and I talk to her about it, she she tells me that this idea of you have to be doing like so many things in your young age is like a completely new thing, and that going to school is more than enough. Um, I recently started pitching a the idea to my father about opening up a gym in the city where I'm going to school. And I was talking to my mom about it because I felt like my dad wasn't on board with it. And I was trying to explain how I thought it was a great idea and how it would be successful. And she was telling me that, when she tells her friends and such that like I'm doing bodybuilding and, going pro last year while doing school and maintaining my grades, they're like amazed that I'm able to just even do that, which to me sometimes feels like for me it's become more normal because I've been doing it. But hearing that from someone else like kind of recenters you and like yeah, you don't have to be trying to juggle a ton of things at once because if you try juggling a ton of things at once, then you end up dropping all the balls. So you really just have to be able to ask yourself questions. You have to be able to reflect on yourself and what you want. And if you're not able to do that, then I guess the best thing that you could do to move in that direction is make the decision to delete whatever social media app you're seeing all this on. If for me, sometimes I wish I could just delete the Instagram app. But I'm sharing my journey for a reason. I also have a uh supplement sponsor that, kind of requires me to share myself on social media. But for someone who's just like on social media, maybe they have like their personal account or whatnot, is it you got to ask yourself, is that account really that important to you? And if it's not, I think it's best to even just if just for like a few months back away from it completely, and then maybe then you'll be able to talk to yourself and see where you really want to go.
Thank you for that. I think that's a great way to kind of bounce into some of these questions here. So I appreciate you
Of course.
reflecting that. And so I guess yeah, I'll present this to Jack first, and then there's a so talking about how to how to getting off of social media to get to other senses of community that counteract the manosphere. What are some spaces in your respective geographies that really help to bring people together? Um, I know that we all live relatively closely. This is with Maine. There's at least relationship that tends to overlap. But does anybody want to answer that question? And Jack, the reason that it came up is because I know that you're working in various different spaces. Are there any that you can think of that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, my close social circle has a weekly check-in, and our weekly check-in has affirmations and updates and a thing we call Thunderdome, where we share impacts that we've had on one another. And we started doing that intentionally to normalize feedback. Exactly what Danny was talking about earlier. You build these muscles, they get stronger. And one of the things we recently implemented as part of our weekly check-in with what is a half dozen of us is uh, built on this Sufi practice where the Sufis, we are told, have a practice, some communities, where they hoard responsibility. So if I'm doing dishes in the sink and a dish breaks, Bruce is going to come over and be like, "Oh, that was my fault because I was moving the dishes over to you too fast." And Danny's going to jump in and he's going to say, "No, no, no, that was my fault because I didn't finish cleaning the kitchen thoroughly the other night. So that dish broke because of me." Fareed's going to jump in and say, "No, no, no, that was my fault because I didn't finish getting the sponges changed on time. So it wasn't set up well for you." And it's just a whole community practice of hoarding responsibility. We started doing this before Thunderdome. So now every week we'll go around and we name our personal responsibilities, impacts we know we've had. Everyone else in the group claims responsibility for the impacts we know we've had. And then we share impacts that we've had on each other. But by the time we're done those practices, we're sharing impacts we've had on each other. It's so minimal because we're like, "Oh, Bruce knows that he didn't return my text on time. Fareed knows." Like, people have already taken responsibility. So it's a sharing of it's a practical sharing of responsibility. So I would suggest have weekly check-in spaces with your friends. That same group of friends has a weekly game night where we play D&D and we envision ourselves being powerful in a completely different world. And that kind of future imagining and flexing of collective imagination and story writing is also super empowering and liberating in these ways. So I think both formal check-in spaces and game time, relaxation time are huge benefits where you can start to and those things weave together to create a very accountable community. We are accountable to one another in a very applied, weekly, real way. And that is super grounding.
That's awesome. You guys get together and share physical space then?
Yeah. Yeah, at least twice a week, usually more. I mean, we share land with some of these people. We live on an off-grid land project, and most of the folks live here, some folks live elsewhere, but we all get together at least a couple times a week, and that kind of grounding. Also, not quite every day, but pretty much every day, I sit outside for 15 minutes first thing in the morning with a cup of coffee, watching the lake, and I've done that for 10, 15 years. And starting every day in the real world before I pick up a screen is really good for me, really important. Fareed, your advice is well taken. The other day I was on TikTok where, as Bruce said, I have a very large following, and all of a sudden I got booted off and my account was gone from my device. And I was like, "Oh, was that it? Did I just lose that massive account?" And the first feeling that I had was relief. I was like, "Oh, thank God." I can stop worrying about all that nonsense. And then it came back, and I was like, "All right, I guess I still have a responsibility to a platform or something. I don't know." But yeah, take a break, get off it for a while. I got off TikTok for a year, and it was really good for me. I'll
Well,
pass it.
yeah, I have to say, I feel like we like D&D, I know, got adapted for Zoom and for online when when we all had to deal with with the pandemic, and we all adjusted for that, and we all adjusted for like men's groups, and we adjusted for all those things onto Zoom because of the pandemic. And then kind of getting unadapting it has been a huge challenge for us. So yeah, it's kind of funny the way that's worked out. I'd love to create space, for anyone else who wants to talk about, alternatives to connection and gathering, outside of these online communities. Because I think in general we can talk about Manosphere, but we can also talk about online communities. And I also want to say, I don't, I think there are great things about online communities, and I have some in my life that are incredibly, um, pro-social and make the world a better place because I'm a part of them, or because they're a part of me. And but I'm curious if other people have suggestions of great places to connect and be a part of community.
Um, I'm not sure I have a direct answer to that question, but I feel like would be inclined to say that if you can't find this community in reality, or you're not, or you weren't connected to this community before in reality, then being in this specific instances, of course, there's like, just discussion communities and like about, just like niche interests. But for me, like personally, I wouldn't interact with the online fitness and gym community unless, of course, I go to the gym myself. And then you also have to balance it. Which one is more important to you, the one online or the one that you can live in presently and interact with on a real-time basis. And for me, that's obviously an easy choice. It might be different for other communities, but I think there has to be some sort of connection to where you can find this specific community that you're interacting with online in reality.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'll jump in there. As someone who's been online for a really long time and used sort of online connections to sort of shift my career. We used to have many, many years ago, back when Twitter was Twitter, back before X. I mean, we used to have tweet ups. Where those of us who followed each other, there used to be a whole like main contingency of folks. We started meeting in Portland. Some of my now closest friends that I've known at least 15 years, I met on Twitter. And I'm still a big fan of suggesting to people, if you connect with somebody online in a community, or if it's like, something like Threads or whatever, if they live fairly close, why not try to meet up with them? I just saw, this is really a timely question. I saw a creator out of Chicago who apparently had a birthday and put up video out and said, hey, I'm going to be at this park at this time. And like several hundreds of people showed up. She didn't know. She was like, I knew like 15 people. I guess though she had a good enough following, people just showed up, brought cake, pickles, all sorts of things. And she, had a video of it. And I thought, that's really how we have to start like connecting with people. I mean, I've been suggesting to readers of my work that I want to do a pop-up discussion. Obviously, I'm known for being a pretty proficient speaker. I've done TED Talks, all that sort of stuff. And, I'm like, listen, if you can afford to like get me to your community, I'll waive my normal fee. Let's just gather a group of people and have a conversation. One, because I'm really interested in moving people out of this sort of doom scroll in their work and into actual spaces with people. Like that's a really big part of where I am right now. I think a lot of our political tensions of the moment could be solved if we actually got into physical space with one another. I think some of the real just vitriol we see online, very few people have the ability to say the things that come out of their mouths when they're typing if you had to say it to someone's face. Uh, in the real offline world, nasty things have consequences, not to say that, but I am saying that. So it makes you mindful if we're sharing space. So I really feel strongly that we need to look for community any way we can. Personally, I try to have at least one day fairly unplugged that I hang out with my friends that keeps me grounded. So.
Love that.
And if I could just throw I'll be quick. My hat in the ring, whatever that expression is, my ring in the, I don't even know. I would say to men or to all people, try something new. Like go to a run club, play a rec sport, try a pottery class. It takes an incredible amount of courage, and it's really hard as an adult. As a young person, your brain is still developing. You're so good at making connections and trying new things. It's one of the ways in which I think we discount young people and their ability to just like try something new and think about it in a totally abstracted new way. It's amazing. As an adult, that gets pretty hard. So take that leap of faith. It might suck, but at least you tried, right? And maybe you met some people along the way. I think more and more we need to continue putting ourselves in situations where we might be bad at something, but we're going to be in person with people trying something new.
I love that. I'm hearing, one thing that I hear a lot about, male mortality as a whole, and also, why young men often find themselves to become statistics, is that there is kind of a socialized a socialized valuing of risk tolerance, and risk taking is considered one of the most masculine things. It's like, okay, you go big, you go home. Like, there's so many different things that I can kind of cite there. And at the same time, I'm also hearing from the things that that we're saying, is that there is an aversion to risk, or aversion to pain, especially over the long term. Like there's this huge desire for these quick fixes. So there's kind of this tension between be a man and take this risk, and okay, but I'm also feeling this tension of wanting to avoid pain and trying to take the shortcuts whenever I can, whether it's to get stronger or what, and I think, Fareed, one thing you're kind of saying is there are no shortcuts. Like if you really want to do it, you do it through, and also I heard that with Jack in terms of, going through these processes, and Danny talking about trying new things, and all of these components kind of intersecting there. Um, so yeah, I think that I thank you for just escalating that tension that exists there. Um, there's a question in the Q&A here that says, I saw someone recently that's been bouncing, or saw something recently that's been bouncing around my head. It was a quote, something to the effect that this is the first time in history where women don't need men, not to buy a house, not to co-sign on a credit card or loan, not to make or raise babies. Women don't rely on men for literally anything anymore. And now you get the loneliness, the male loneliness epidemic. Something there feels true to me, though I'm not sure, and I still need to think of it. But this person is just interested in hearing your take on that. Is anybody feeling like there's something in there that's speaking to them, or something that they can speak on?
Yeah, I can jump in. I have to make my wife's life better than it would be without me. And that's a high bar. That's a high bar. My wife is a very healthy, happy, competent person. And to to bounce back to your point about young men not having a lot of risk aversion, I think one potential pathway here that could be really beautiful is taking the beautiful lack of risk aversion that young men tend to have and applying that to accountability. When I was a young man, I liked jumping mountain bikes over cliffs, and that was an insanely stupid and dangerous thing to do that I look back on, I'm like, wow, I was crazy. But the idea of facing harm that I'd caused or facing patterns that I'd inherited that were causing harm around me was felt like dying. And there's a reason for that. We're a social species, so being ostracized is death. And if that's the only thing we can expect from accountability, then it does look like death. But how much are you willing to risk in order for a better world and a healthy relationship, in order to become someone who can improve someone else's life? And I will add this. I think that there is, this is a touchy subject, but I think there's room for some leadership from men around this exact issue of accountability. Because once you take accountability for huge things like patterns of harming your sexual partners, then other forms of accountability get really easy in a way that's very beautiful. So my wife is like, "Oh, I felt kind of hurt and distant that you were so absorbed in your devices this week, and I didn't feel connected to you." And I'm like, "Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That doesn't challenge me at all because I've taken responsibility for incredibly heavy harm." Somebody says, "Hey, Jack, you have a pattern of racism that's showing up in this way," and I'm like, "Yeah, of course I do. I was raised a white guy in the woods of Maine. How could, of course I have that. Like that doesn't threaten me at all. I just want to lean into it and move through it." So getting over these big hurdles of accountability, of having caused serious harm in relationships, sets us up to be community leaders in the form of being able to normalize all kinds of accountability in beautiful ways. And that puts us in a position to learn enough to make other people's lives better, be able to hear feedback in meaningful ways, and show up as healthy partners in ways that improve other people's lives rather than just being the sort of typical Western man child who is another baby that the wife has to take care of all the time.
I love that. Thank you. We're starting to get close to time, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to hear kind of a closeout from everybody. So if I can just put out the question to you, what is it that gives you hope right now? I want to end on kind of a high note. And is there anybody who has something on the tip of their tongue that would like to start us? Otherwise, we can go do a round.
I'll jump in. Something that gives me hope right now, I think I mentioned, but part of my work currently is leading like community building restorative practice circles or co-leading them with coworkers. And what I've noticed, if I bring my identity as a man into that space, or if I just show up in that space, if any of the other people that are helping organize it, coworkers or community builders within schools or whoever else are men, who are the people showing up? It's often boys, right? And we don't have to do anything. We don't have to speak on masculinity. We don't have to say anything other than we're just here to talk about our lives. Usually we're sharing about things that we're excited about, things we're nervous for the future. We talk about our families. We talk about whatever. We just share experiences of who we are together in a space and in a circle. And just by being a man in that space, boys come because they say, I can see something here, right? I can see something different maybe than what I'm seeing online. And so for me, that gives me a lot of hope. I think that young people crave community. Everybody does. And just showing up and being an alternative to some of these things that we're seeing in the documentary, I think young people are as receptive to that, if not more receptive to that, than they are to these messages that they're seeing there.
Awesome. Thank you, Danny. Let's see. Shay, can we go to you?
Sure. I think in this particular moment, conversations like this absolutely give me hope. Just to see such a diverse group here, being able to have a conversation and really find some like shared ground, and ultimately, that's a lot of what gives me hope in my work these days. Are the one-on-one conversations or the small group conversations, because so much of what we are put out there in the media and the social media, it's pretty discouraging. I mean, you read the comments on most things, and it makes me just want to go to the woods and like unplug and get off the grid and like learn how to grow food or something. But again, this is a really diverse group, and just hearing all of us find our commonality, that's a hopeful moment for me.
Awesome. I love it. Fareed, can we hop over to you?
Yeah, so um I talk to my friends and my roommate quite often about like, stuff we see online, whether that's particularly with my roommate, he's brought up um guys like Clavicular quite often and what he thinks of like that type of messaging from influencers like that. And with my other friends, it's like, current, I mean, also with my roommate, like current events, how like ridiculous people's opinions come off of on the internet. And that gives me hope because it kind of highlights that even though social media is becoming this alternative virtual reality, when you have conversations with people about it in person, then you can all kind of see the ridiculousness and the unnecessary unnecessary I'm sorry, I'm just going to say ridiculousness of it all.
Wow.
And it's just good. It's just good to see that human one-on-one in-person interaction will always be more genuine than what goes on online. So gives me hope that no matter how big this sphere of social media, the manosphere, grows, there will always be those that can come back to reason when discussing it in person.
Awesome. Thank you, Fareed. Jack, we finish with you.
I want to add a layer to this conversation about hope. And it's because the word hope in English often pulls in different directions. So the way that we mean it in a healthy context and the way that I'm hearing all of these beautiful expressions of it show up is as a pathway. We're seeing pathways that are like, oh yeah, there's a pathway of young boys gravitating to these men. There's a pathway of these different things happening. But in English, there's often also a sense of outsourcing in the word hope, where people say they hope for a better tomorrow as though someone else is going to do something about it. And so I'm not saying this to disagree with any of the rest of the my panelists here. I just want to add this layer. I want to invite you to set down hope, become completely hopeless, because it is in hopelessness that our eyes become completely clear and we see exactly where we are without any fictions of tomorrow being better for some mythical reason. And when we take up hopelessness, then we're able to act with full clarity and integrity for who we are today. Make today better. No politician is coming to save you. Nothing is coming to save you or change this. You must pick up responsibility now, today. And within that, I think hopelessness becomes an act of great courage and power. So I will leave it at that.
Awesome. Amazing. Good. Thank you. What a way to kind of close things out. And on that note, I think there is a chance for me to just once again plug Maine Boys to Men. Just so you know, some of our programming, what it looks like. We have 11 young men from the Portland region that we're working with on a new leadership fellowship program that we hope to be able to expand. This is our pilot program. We have something called our RSVP, Reducing Sexism and Violence Prevention program that we bring into middle schools and high schools. And actually, we have a intro workshop next Wednesday that's actually free, and you can connect to us on our website and get a little idea of what it is that we do. It's about a 2-hour Zoom workshop that gives you an idea of what is the programming that we're bringing in. Yeah, I mean, it just in general, hopefully, hopefully you see value in these conversations. We hope to continue to keep bringing these conversations forward. Hopefully you can hold them, with the people in your community too. And hopefully they're the beginnings of conversations rather than just something that you consume. That's really the goal here. And I think that's about all that we have time for here. But I just once again want to thank everybody and thank the panelists. This was incredible. And we look forward to seeing folks when we have our next panel, which hopefully will not be that far in the future. But for now, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Well, you can tell everybody. Yeah, you can tell everybody. Go ahead and tell everybody. I'm the man, I'm the man, I'm the man.